Episode 39 was going to be, my plan was for it to be survival-based questions based on the feedback and input that I had received from all of you, the guys and gals out there who listen to the podcast and support the podcast. I got a ton of questions. I actually had them all printed out. Was ready to go. I was actually packed and about 10 hours from going up to British Columbia to hunt black bear with the one and only John Dudley, John Barklow, not to be confused with John Dudley, two Johns, different last name, and a good friend, Trevor Thompson. And that didn't happen. Sometimes life gets in the way. And all I can say is, at some point in the future, I don't know if that's going to be 6 months from now, and I don't know if it's going to be 6 years from now. I'll dig into the reasons why I ended up not going up there, but I didn't. Life, I would say, threw me a little bit of a variable. I should say it threw my family a little bit of a variable. And instead of going hunting, I needed to take some time for myself. I needed to take some time for my family. If there's one thing that I am absolutely certain of in this life, it's that I've made more errors than the cumulative total of errors made by the number of people who listen to this podcast. And I try to be open and honest about them because hopefully some people can learn from them. But that time to be open and honest about kind of what I'm going through and what my family is going through right now, it's not today, but it'll be sometime in the future. And the podcast is going to continue. And I made the post on Instagram about taking some time for myself. I didn't mean to, I don't want to use the term frighten anybody who was listening who thought I wasn't going to continue. I am going to continue. I think it's a very healthy medium for myself. I've said this before. It helps me work my way through my own thoughts and my own beliefs. And I'm definitely going to continue to do so. And on that note, I will get around to doing the survival / gear / best practices with both Barklow and Dudley, and probably Trevor as well too, because we have more hunts that we're going to do this year. And there's more important things in life than hunting sometimes. So that's what I've been doing for the last, I don't know how long it's been. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say about that. So let's get back into the podcast world. Today may not be the longest one. Kind of working my way back in here, putting my toes back in the pool. But I have some questions from the internet. So let's dig into them. Episode 39. Here we go.
Okay, I got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
If I had to pick one theme of questions that I get the most consistently or the most often, it would fall into this category, this question right here, which is why I'm going to open with it. I would say 2 to 3 times per week, I get an email from an individual that in essence says, I wish I had taken the opportunity to serve. And now I am later in my life and I have things in my life. Usually it's related to family, but I cannot get rid of the nagging feeling that I need to either do more or I should have served, and I regret the fact that I didn't, and I'm considering doing it now. What should I do? And like I said, it usually comes in the form of I passed on the opportunity earlier in life, but now I have a family or somebody that I really care about, or I feel like I should have done more. My job is pointless or it's meaningless, and I just don't feel like I'm contributing at all. Now, first and foremost, I'm not going to tell people what to do with their life. I don't think that I have the right to do so, but I will be honest about my experiences and my thoughts on military service in general, and then it's going to be on that individual who reached out to choose. And I know that I'm discussing this now in an audio version, but I do try to write back to every single person that writes to me, especially on this particular topic. But if I've ever written back to you at the end of the day, at the very bottom, it's going to probably end with, the choice is yours to make. Just go into that choice with your eyes wide open. So for service in general, I personally think that mandatory service would be a great idea for this country. I think it would be a step in the right direction to correct some of what I would consider to be the deficiencies that at least I see in our society. That doesn't mean specifically military service, though. There are a ton of ways to serve absent wearing a military uniform. I don't care if that mandatory service, and I think 2 years is probably a good starting point, but it could be the Red Cross. You could work for Habitat for Humanity, the Peace Corps, and there's probably 50 other options. The point being, I think service outside of just yourself, the requirement to, at least for a short period of time, take your focus off of yourself and serve other people is a great thing. At the very least, I think it'll change your perspective. I think it would enhance it, and it would definitely give you some unique experiences that come from service outside of our borders. I would love it if not only the mandatory service was required, but at some point during that time, you had to leave the United States and go somewhere that is the polar opposite, both in belief, economic status, whatever it may be, wherever you come from, whatever we have as a country, to go to the other side of the coin, at least for a little bit, for a small period of time. Immerse yourself in a culture that doesn't have the things that we have on a daily basis. You can't achieve those experiences by looking at something that's electronic. You can't achieve that through Instagram. You can't achieve that by looking at your computer. And if you go there and you get your hands dirty in that environment, that perspective will stay with you for the rest of your life. My point being, I think service is great. Now, for those of you that have reached out with the question about wanting to enlist specifically in the military, because that's the question that I'm getting. I'm not getting questions about volunteering for the Peace Corps. I am getting questions from people who just have this nagging urge or regret about either not serving or wanting to serve. And on that particular topic, here's what I'll say. First and foremost, take your time. This is not a decision. The decision to enlist in the military is not one that I would recommend knee-jerking yourself into. If you have a bad run at work or a bad run in your personal life, it is not the time to go to a military recruiter and sign on the dotted line. You need to detach yourself from whatever it is that you're going through and make that decision in an objective environment, not a mentally or emotionally compromised environment. While you're taking that time to think about this decision, I would also take that time to reflect on yourself and answer the question for yourself, what is it that I think that I'm missing? And what do you think that service in the military would provide? What hole is that going to fill for you? What do you want to get out of the military service? And once you can define that, once you determine for yourself what it is that you think you are missing, take a very objective look at the military in general. Is the military capable of providing that fill in the blank for you? And the answer to that question is not always going to be yes. The military is great for a lot of things, but it's not a multi-tool, especially when it comes to satisfying an individual and what that individual wants to get out of their service. Occupation inside of the military, they vary greatly. Some of them may scratch that itch for you. Others may not at all. Bottom line, if you don't know what you want, if you as an individual have this urge or this desire, but you don't know what's driving it and you don't know what it would take to satiate that hunger, the military is a guaranteed poor option, because what you're going to get in military service, if you don't know what you want, is what the military wants from you. Now, I would say a repeating theme that I often hear in my own head when I'm reading these emails is some form or version of, I want to get into the fight. I want to get into the military, into an occupation that gets me overseas and gets me into the fight. And that's honorable, in my opinion, at least. The desire to get off the sidelines and get involved in the plays that are happening overseas, in my opinion, that's honorable. But what I'll say is this. What if you join the military with the express desire and the singular goal of wanting to fight, and you don't get to? The reality is that your personal desires and the military needs, they're not always parallel. In my opinion, from what I have seen and talking to individuals that are still in active duty, the heyday, or whatever you would want to describe it as, the peak, the apex of the mature theaters of war, where the vast majority of the fighting was taking place, they're over. And the face of warfare for the modern military is shifting. So if you come in and think that it's going to be on a daily basis, Call of Duty in real life, you're going to have an issue with your expectation management. I obviously don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell the future, and the future could change overnight. That's basically what happened on 9/11. It changed the trajectory of my military career. It changed the trajectory of our country, and that could certainly happen again. But with the current environment, in even what I saw post 9/11 in my own career, I would best describe it as feast or famine. There are long periods of time where you are going to focus your efforts on training and personal skills and mastery of your occupation. And then in between those things, there'll be brief bouts of activity or the fighting that the individuals are expressing the desire to get involved with, if they are in an occupational role that actually is tasked with that fighting. And I know I've said this before, but I think it's an important point to bring up again. When you look at the military as a whole, and when you look at the movies about fighting and about combat, they're not telling the story of the military. They're telling the story of a small percentage of people who wear a uniform. The reality is that only a handful of occupational specialties have as their core role, as their core competency, engaging with an enemy in combat. Now, if you find yourself inside of one of those communities because you enlisted or joined with that desire to fight, your odds of encountering that are obviously better. But that feast or famine and the reality of the warfare or the warfighting environment that we're seeing right now still exists. Bottom line, the world can conspire against you. And even for the people who are joining today to fight, I hope that it does. I hope that our world continues to morph into an environment where you have no opportunity to fight. And I say that as somebody who spent a good amount of their adult life in an environment fighting. I don't want anybody else to have to do that. Now, like I said at the beginning, I am not going to ever talk somebody out of joining the military or talk negatively about the experience that you can gain from the military. But I do truly hope that nobody gets the opportunity to fight, because it means that our world's headed in a better direction. Is that actually going to happen? I don't think so. But that's my hope at the end of the day. Now, the reason I bring all that stuff up and talk about the percentages of troops that actually engage in combat and the world having the potential to conspire against you and that it could be feast or famine is I'm trying to drive home the point that it's very possible for an individual to sign an enlistment contract for 4 or 6 years to serve even in the unit that they would want to serve in based on their desire to fight. And in that 4 or 6 year time period, not get the opportunity to do so. And at the end of that 4 or 6 years, if that was the only thing that you felt was missing from your life, you were going to find yourself in the exact same position that you are in right now. And I would describe that as either unsatisfied or unfulfilled. And then what? I have people reaching out to me in their mid-20s. So that individual is now in their late 20s, maybe their early 30s. And I also have people reaching out to me who are in their late 30s, or mid to late 30s, I would say, actually. So that individual is now, at the very least, in their late 30s, potentially in their early 40s. And you're in the same place that you were prior to signing your enlistment contract and joining the military. Because the satisfaction or the single goal that you were looking for didn't have the chance to express itself. The other most common theme that I get from individuals reaching out is that they want to make a difference. And my response to that is yes, good, do it. And just be aware that wearing a uniform is not the only way to make a difference. If you want to join, and that's the decision that you make based off of an objective review of who you are, where you are, and what you want to get out of your service, awesome. Drive forward and do that. Join if that's the decision that you want to make. But understand that making a difference in the world around you and wearing a uniform are not the same thing. You absolutely can do both while you're wearing a uniform if you get the opportunity to do so. But you can also do one without the other. You don't have to wear a uniform to make a difference in the world around you. When I say the world around you, I'm not talking about geopolitical. I'm talking about your community or your family or your spouse or your kids. When I was in the military, I thought I had a very impactful job on the world around me. And the world around me in that environment was the battlefield that I was standing on. And on that battlefield, the maximum effective range of my influence was directly related to the maximum effective range of the bullets that I could shoot. If I could shoot 2,000 yards, that was the limit of my influence. And at the time, I thought it was incredibly impactful and influential, and it was. But now I look at my life and look at the things that I'm doing now, and I've come to the realization that leadership, whether that be at work, whether that be in your community, whether that be in your house, has a range that is exponentially greater than any bullet that you could ever fire. The ability to actually change the world around you. And again, that starts at your house and your community. And the things that you can actually control is so much greater than the range of an actual bullet. If I can raise my children and instill in them principles and philosophies and integrity and morals, and they go out into the world, and that ripples far beyond anything that I could ever comprehend, that is how I'm actually going to make change. And it's important, I think, for people to not forget that. So if you want to get out there and make a difference, do it. Don't let the clothing that you're wearing or that you think that you need to wear or the patches or the insignia, don't let that get in your way. Don't let that trip you up. Like I said, you can make a difference while you're wearing a uniform, but you can absolutely make a difference wearing flip-flops, a t-shirt, and a pair of board shorts as well. The last thing I'll say about joining the military, for those of you that have reached out or those of you that are considering joining the military for maybe some of the reasons I've already discussed, remember and realize that there is a difference between price and cost. Now, the price of military service, this is paid by the enlistee. This is paid by the person who signs a contract, much like when you sign a contract for a new vehicle. It lists what the vehicle is going to cost. It lists what your payments are going to be, the time period that you're going to make those payments in, what the vehicle provider is going to give to you. It's a straightforward contract. Now, when you join the military, it's actually really straightforward as well. You're going to sign for a certain period of time. In that time period, you're going to surrender some of your rights, and you're going to swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution and serve the people of this country and follow the orders of the President of the United States, whether you voted for him or not. The person who signs the bottom line of that contract, they're the one who they are the one who pays the price for the enlistment. And I think it's important to at least discuss that although the individual who signs on the dotted line pays the price, it's your family and loved ones who bear the cost. The easiest role, in my opinion, in the military family dynamic is that of the service member. You're going to be very focused on your job. You are probably going to have a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment, and you may even be doing what you love. Hopefully you have all three of those things. Inherent in that, especially if your job involves combat, you're going to have choices to make, and the choices that you're likely going to make are going to be selfish in nature. It is demanded by the occupation. If you want to be operating at the highest level, the vast majority of your time and attention is going to be focused on operating at the highest level. You're going to be coming and going a ton. You are going to be disrupting the schedule of your family. If you are married and you have kids and you're serving on active duty, you are going to be coming and going to the point where it may actually become a disruption when you come home because life continues when you're gone. Then you need to add into that the deployments, the worry, the stress, and the fear that not only that your spouse and your family and your loved ones are going to feel, those things are all going to be felt by the service member as well. And what I'll tell you right now is you're not going to find that discussion of worry, stress, or fear in your enlistment contract because there's a difference between the price of service and the cost of service. Speaking for myself, I spent time pushing that worry, stress, and fear down and away from my thoughts because I was trying to focus on doing my job to the best of my ability. It doesn't go away. It's going to come back at some point. You're going to miss birthdays, you're going to miss holidays, and you're going to miss special occasions. The coming and going is very difficult. Sometimes there isn't time to deal with and work through issues that can develop through the course of a normal relationship. And all I'll say is, just like the worry, stress, and fear, those issues will be back. Some relationships can survive. What I have seen, at least from the community that I come from, I don't want to say all, because it's definitely not all, so that would be inaccurate to begin with, but a lot, maybe even most, they stumble. And in addition to all of those stresses, which again I would put down in the cost, not the price, one of the biggest costs of service is that at the end of the day, it may take your life. And you can't forget that. If you make a decision to enlist in the military, it is the armed forces. They call it that for a reason. And at the end of this, I hope, I don't mean to dissuade anybody from joining the military. I'm just trying to give an honest assessment of my experiences and the impact that it has had on my life. All I want people to do is weigh the risk versus the reward. Weigh the price versus the cost. The military is one option among many, and I don't feel like I have the right to tell anybody what they should do, but I think I do have the right to tell people that they should make their decisions with both eyes open. And I think it's responsible. I think I should be required to say that and required to give people my honest assessment because they have to make the decision to join objectively. And some people who hear this, who maybe are considering that they want to join the military because they have that nagging urge, maybe they're going to decide to take another path. I am not trying to drive you down that path, but if you decide to take another path, just commit to it. The one thing I'll say is, don't look back. Find other ways to serve, find other ways to have impact and influence, and don't live your life with regret. For some people and in some situations, you have more to lose than to gain by joining the military. Only you can make that choice. So hopefully I wasn't rambling too much, and that helps some people who are struggling with or dealing with or have questions about this right now in their life make their choice. All right, the second question comes from Twitter. It says, you've talked about snake oil salesmen in uniform. Does it really matter how you use it if you fulfilled your contract, followed orders, and made all the sacrifices? Yes, it really matters. Fulfilling your contract, following the orders, and making all the sacrifices, that's great. Let's also remember that that is what you voluntarily signed up to do. And in my opinion, it's a privilege that you had the opportunity to do that. Service in the military is a privilege. Now, snake oil salesmen in general, I would say most people would consider those to be liars or people who are frauds. Or if you look it up on the internet, it's going to tell you that somebody who is knowingly selling a fraudulent good or fraudulent product. Would anybody have an issue calling out a fraud absent military service? And if the answer to that is no, I would absolutely have no issue with calling somebody out. Why does having worn a uniform change that at all? Now, what I will say about, I don't think I've ever used the term snake oil salesman. I think I've probably used the term fraud or liars when it comes to people manipulating their military career for their personal benefit. One thing I will point out is that the vast, vast minority of individuals actually do that. Unfortunately, it can have an impact and it can negatively paint the majority. So it's a small group of people, but that small group of people, or I should say not even the small group of people, in general, having worn a military uniform is not a ticket to a free pass. And what irritates me the most from those individuals who are twisting and contorting who they are or what they did is that the reputation they are tarnishing and the trust that they're betraying was created long before that individual, and it doesn't belong to them. I don't care what your achievements are when you're wearing a uniform. I don't believe that an action or an achievement from your past grants you the license to either lie or cheat or steal. And what you're stealing, again, is the trust and confidence of the American public. And that's what bothers me the most. It is an honorable, respected profession. And when you lie about who you are and what you did, you're manipulating the trust of the people that you are actually serving. And in my opinion, service doesn't end when you hang up your uniform. It's just the beginning. So yes, it absolutely matters how people portray themselves post-military service. Be honest about who you are and what you did and why you did it. It was about serving the people of this country, not lying to them. Next question. Hey, Andy, how do you define / find meaning in your work after having a job with such a clearly defined purpose? I think a lot of people struggle with that these days when stuck in average desk driving jobs. Keen to hear your thoughts. Cheers. I wonder if this guy is from overseas. I don't hear cheers very often. So if you are, cheers to you as well. Now, but to your question. I think the only place I can start, if I'm being honest with this, is that perhaps it would be better to detach purpose and occupation. Sometimes your occupation is just your occupation, and you need it to enable your drive towards your purpose. And then sometimes maybe you get lucky and you find or are able to serve what you feel is your purpose in your occupation, but not always. I struggled when I got out of the military, when I left the job that you're referencing, right? The meaning, how did I find meaning in my work after having a job with such a clearly defined purpose? The reality and truth is that I struggled. I left the military in June of 2013 and ended up sitting on my couch, feeling sorry for myself, watching the news instead of working in an occupation that occasionally would make it. But what bothered me about that time period is that it seemed to me, at least, that the vast majority of the news reporting was on the what I'll call the eroding tide of the accomplishments that we had made while I was serving. Specifically, at that time period in Iraq, it seemed as if the literal and figurative blood, sweat, and tears that many people had put in to pacify certain regions of that country was slowly being eaten away by ISIS and Al-Qaeda, whichever group you want to associate or title it with. But it seemed to me as if I was sitting on the couch and I was watching the tide go out an inch at a time until it was a mile down the road. And I really struggled with it. Also, at that same time period, I was very fortunate. I left the military and I had another occupation that I was able to leave the military one day and step into the next. I was actually working for that company on the weekends in my off time while I was in the military. So I was very fortunate in that there really was no gap in my employment. But what I will say is the employment that I moved into, I found myself staying with that job and making decisions in that job based purely on financial need. That job was not providing me any job satisfaction. The organization itself wasn't providing me any satisfaction in being involved with it. And for clarity, that's my fault. That's not the fault of the organization. And in that time of my life, I don't think I've ever been more unhappy. I was making a good amount of money, more money than I had made when I was in the military, and I was wildly unhappy. And again, that was my fault. My head was in the wrong place. I know who I am, and I know what it is that I want to do as a person and with my life in general from a broad perspective. And for me, what it comes down to is that I want to make a difference. I want to fight. That's what I wanted to do my entire adult life. Not for fighting's sake, but fighting to make a difference, fighting so other people wouldn't have to. But I found myself at a time in my life where I couldn't do that anymore. So I had to find something else. And it took me a while to find something else. It actually took me the suggestions, listening to the suggestions from other people and having conversations with other people. And what really turned the tide for me is when I realized that I can still stay in the fight, the greater overarching fight. And the best way that I could do that initially, which helped get my ass off the couch, was by supporting the people who were still in the fight. And I did that by fundraising and setting a goal of trying to raise money for the Navy SEAL Foundation. It was involved with flying my wingsuit because that's what I knew how to do. I attempted to break a couple of records. I was successful in breaking 2 out of the 4 that I was aiming for. And the whole goal of that was to raise money to support the warfighters via an organization that is designed and by charter exists to support the families. And in my personal opinion, absent being shoulder to shoulder with those individuals, supporting the families that are left behind, both in catastrophic event and in deployment cycles, is the next best step. And it really helped me find my purpose again. I don't know if I had ever really lost it. I'll just say that I got distracted along the way, and I needed that activity to kind of recalibrate my head. And in doing that activity, I also came to the realization that I was surrounded by amazing people in the community that I came from. The only unique thing about me are those people and that community that I grew up in and became a grown man in. I'd give my personal career a C at best. I would say I'm average across the board, both in capability and athletic ability. But the people that I was surrounded by were exponentially better than me. And that's what was unique. Even more so were the lessons that those people and the lessons that that community imparted on me. I realized that another way that I can stay involved into the fight is to pass those lessons as far and wide as humanly possible, which led me to what I spend about half of my year doing now, public speaking. I always enjoyed it when I was working for the other organization that I worked for when I was in the military and when I got out. It involved some level of public speaking when I first began, and I always enjoyed it, and I couldn't figure out exactly why. And I realized that I'd like to teach. Teaching, passing on those lessons learned, that's making a difference. That's staying involved in the fight. That's trying to make a generational shift. And I'm very fortunate that I have been able to at least partially build my life around that. Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there who do not feel that way about their current job, whatever it may be. Like I kind of answered in the first question, I get emails often about people who just don't feel comfortable with their station in life and they feel like they can do more. If that's you and you're looking for your purpose, or you're feeling like your day job isn't satisfying, whatever it may be, I would say the first step that you need to do is determine what it is that you're passionate about. What is it that fulfills you? What is it that you feel is your purpose, or that you want to work towards in a purposeful manner? For me, like I said, I want to make a difference. That's like, at the end of the day, that's the best I can describe myself with the vocabulary that I have that drives the vast majority of the actions that I take. Anytime that I ever need to be reminded of my purpose, all I need to do is look in the eyes of my children, and I get lost in the sea of responsibility and the burden of leadership when it comes to raising my children and doing everything I can to mold them and the world around them so it is a better place than the world that I was born into. Not that the world that I was born into was a terrible place, but I want to make it better for my kids. My purpose, really, the desire to make a difference, is in this phase of my life driven by what I see when I look into the eyes of my children. So start there. Figure out what it is that you're passionate about. Find your motivation. Find what drives your purpose. And then pay your bills. For people who reach out to me and they say that they're not satisfied with their job, I would love to say, quit your job and dive headlong into your passion. I think that's a great ideology. That's more idealistic than it is practical. I don't think you're going to be very happy if you're broke. And if you are supporting a family, obviously support of that family should take priority. So pay your bills first, and I think it's okay if the current job you have is just a means to an end. I don't think you should do that for your entire life, but you're going to find yourself, as I have found myself, in positions in your life where that's what it's going to be, and that's okay. People who work at McDonald's probably aren't there because they feel it's their purpose in life. They're probably there because they have bills to pay and they need to pay those bills. So handle that first. And then once you handle those financial responsibilities, devote your time and effort that you have to that fulfillment, to that purpose, to that passion. For me, it's the family, it's my kids, it's mentorship, and whatever that may be for you. Use your job to provide you space so you can focus on and nurture and develop what it is that you want to do, or what it is that you get that fulfillment from. Turn it into your occupation if you can. I think that would be great. If you can't, use your occupation to fund and enable whatever it is that you're passionate about. And the last thing I'll say is get outside. I just feel like the human soul is missing something when you don't push yourself. So maybe get outside might be bad. If you can get outside, but go find something that is physically challenging. Challenge yourself. Maybe it's small, but make sure that it happens as often as possible. I would say every single day. For me, when I do that, it allows me I feel more grounded, which when I feel grounded, I feel more connected to what it is I feel like my purpose in life is. So challenge yourself. It works. Or I should say it works for me at least, but I think it'll work for you as well. Next question. Toronto had a terror/non-terror attack, depending on who you listen to. 10 dead and 15 injured. How about situational awareness and how not to become a victim? This one comes from Twitter as well, and there were at least 3 or 4 questions that alluded to talking about situational awareness. So I'm going to combine all of those questions and try to answer them, and then also explain how I try to discuss this concept or reinforce this concept with my kids at an age-appropriate level. So as to whether or not the attack in Toronto was terrorism or non-terrorism, I don't know. In my opinion, terrorism is purely a tactic. It's not an organization. It's a tactic often used by a numerically inferior force to inflict fear or panic or control over a numerically superior force. And it really works. But I think the reason that people would classify what happened in Toronto as non-terrorism is because if you look up the definition, I'll read it to you right now. It says terrorism is, in the broadest sense, the use of intentionally indiscriminate violence as a means to create terror among masses of people. So I would say that, yeah, that criteria is met in Toronto. The criteria is not met, it says, or fear to achieve a financial, political, religious, or ideological aim. I am not 100% up to speed on the exact motivations of the individual from Toronto, but I think he might have been a little bit more in the crazy bucket than the political, religious, or ideological bucket, which is probably why people are saying the event doesn't rise to the level of terrorism. I don't know. Like I said, it's a tactic, and it's an effective one because it can allow a small group of people or an individual to control a larger group of people. On the situational awareness front, I guess if we're going to talk about it, we have to define it. The situational awareness, the term itself, the context that I'm used to hearing it in, or the environment that we used to discuss it in, was in combat on the battlefield. And I guess I would describe it as an individual being immersed and present in the tactical environment. You're managing and you're monitoring it in real time. And by that I mean you're uptaking and processing information in order to make tactical decisions. When you lose your SA or your situational awareness, most often it looks like being overwhelmed. You, as a leader, lose sight of the bigger picture, most often caused by micromanaging small issues while large ones are running unchecked. And that applies, those things that I just covered, those apply to just about everything. But like I said, the environment that I'm used to talking about these terms in is the tactical environment. What I'll say about situational awareness is this. It does not, in and of itself, prevent you from being a victim. It does not prevent ambushes. It can help you avoid them because you might potentially make decisions to avoid tactically disadvantageous positions, but it does not guarantee that you will never be ambushed and that you will never be a victim. And I think that's very important to remember. There's a lot of talk about situational awareness. It's not a cure-all. What I will say is I think it increases your survivability because if you're situationally aware, you have previously considered options based on the environment that you're in. And I'll give you an example. I will lay out a scenario for you. This is the same individual, and I just want you to think about this, the two differences or the two scenarios and the difference between them in the ability to make a decision and the ability to forecast or to see an event building before you are involved in that event in a shotgun nature, meaning surprised or ambushed. So you take an individual, and let's say they're going into Starbucks, right? Because Starbucks has got free Wi-Fi. So they bring their laptop in, and they go and they find a corner to sit in because it's quiet, and they want to have an area to themselves to work. They're not actually going to work, right? They're actually going to be playing Fortnite and wasting their day away, but that's irrelevant. So they go sit in the corner, and they put their back to the door, so they're facing the corner. They put their earbuds in, flip the laptop open, and dive into whatever it is that they're doing. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario is the same person who still wants to sit in the corner for privacy or whatever it may be. So they do that. But instead of having your back to the door, you put your back to the wall. Actually, you'd have your back to the corner. And you're aware of your environment. You just look up and you just take a quick look around for the layout. Okay, there's the door that I came in, there's the bathrooms, and you go back to your world. You leave your earbuds out, but you're facing the environment. In my opinion, there is a huge difference between those two individual scenarios. One sets you up to be reactive, meaning you're going to have to deal with life as it comes at you because you're going to be surprised, versus the other one is really by changing your physical perspective on the room and allowing your, keeping the earbuds out of your ears and just sitting there and being able to take in the environment from an audible perspective, you are now shifting more into a proactive world. It's the difference between being along for the ride versus being an active participant. If you want to be situationally aware, a portion of that is checking in with your environment. So that's from just like a physical perspective of simple things that you can do, or something simple that you can do to physically put the environment a little bit more into your favor, or at the very least not be at a disadvantage. The other side to situational awareness is the between the ears side, the mental aspect of situational awareness. You have to accept the fact that evil exists, and you have to accept the fact that crazy exists as well. And sometimes they like to pair up and work together. The beauty is it's an incredibly small number of people that are wired that way. So when it comes to mentality, I fully support being prepared, and I strongly recommend against becoming paranoid. You should be able to go to Starbucks and work. You should be able to go out into the world. I believe in one of the questions online it asked specifically about theaters and crowded areas. You should be able to go to those places and feel comfortable. All right. The odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. And odds and stats are great until you find yourself on the wrong side of them. I totally understand that. I would rather take that risk than live my life as an overly paranoid individual. The only way that you're going to make yourself completely safe is if you build a bunker in your house and you work there. The problem with that, and the problem, in my opinion, with being overly paranoid, is that you sacrifice quality of life. And to me, that's just not worth it. So if you've accepted the fact that evil and crazy exist, and sometimes they partner up to become a superhero of destruction, you may need to be prepared. Or actually, that's not the right wording. You need to be prepared to take action if needed. Sometimes the action that you should take is to run. Sometimes the action you should take is to fight. And it may be both. You may need to run towards the fight and get involved. Now, I'm not going to go scenario after scenario after scenario because a lot of it depends on proximity. In an active shooter environment and you're a half a mile away, is it smart for you to run towards that? I don't know. I can't answer that because that's really going to depend on the environment around you. The best way you can try to prepare yourself for that is to give yourself the advantage as often as possible. Try to give yourself as much time to make decisions as you can. It's the same theory as defensive driving. And actually defensive driving is a good example because if you sit there behind the wheel and you're over gripping the steering wheel and you're hyper focused at all times on everything around you, what ends up happening is you become exhausted relatively quickly as well. And then your driving actually takes a nosedive. It's a balance between paying attention and being prepared, but pushing back those crashing waves of paranoia. So think of situational awareness as mental defensive driving. Now, when it comes to my kids, the best examples that I can give them of behaviors that they should watch out for are the ones that they actually see in everyday life. So I spend a lot of time talking with my kids about dangerous behaviors that they have seen with the intent of teaching them to recognize it early. And once they recognize it early, then there's an action that's going to need to be taken in addition to that. My kids are constantly told that if you see something wrong, you need to do something about it. That might be go get a teacher. That might be call 911. And that also might be stepping in and handling something on your own. If you need to fight, then God damn it, fight. I'm sick and tired of hearing from people that there is no place and time for violence. That is wrong, period. It should be avoided at all costs, but sometimes you're going to have to step up and take action. And my kids are, again, constantly told that if they take action and if there is violence involved, if that violence or action is justified, they're not going to get in trouble from me. They're going to get a high five and a milkshake if that's what they're into. And obviously that's a joke, but what they're going to get is they're going to be praised and rewarded for their behavior because they needed to step up and do the right thing, and that's exactly what they did. Like I said in the beginning, situational awareness is not a cure-all, but it can make a difference in your survivability, so take advantage of it. from a physical perspective, take the tactical advantage anytime it presents itself. And that can be passive, just like the Starbucks example. Just by having your back to the wall as opposed to your back to the door, you're setting yourself up for success because you have an understanding of the environment that's around you. And with that, keep an eye out for crazy. It is out there, but fortunately, you're unlikely to have to encounter it. But if you do encounter it, be prepared. Don't be paranoid. Pack your brain so you are prepared. And what do I mean by that? If I had a choice, I would force people, or if I had the ability to, I would force people to think like a wolf and not like a sheep. All right? Think like a predator. Don't think like prey. And since we've already agreed that there's some passive things that we can do to increase your understanding of your environment, while you're doing those passive things, or when you get into a new environment, ask yourself a few, what-if questions. What if question would I start with if I could only ask myself one, if I had limited time for whatever reason? I would probably ask myself, okay, if something happens here, what's the easiest way for me to get out of this environment? And then if you have more time, ask yourself a few more what ifs, but don't get crazy. Don't spend 2 hours every time you go to Starbucks to crack your laptop open going through the what ifs. What am I going to do if a guy comes in with a shotgun? What do I do if he comes in with a pistol? Take it easy, all right? Let's live in the world of likely and reasonable. Along the lines of packing your brain, I already covered this, but I think it's important, and I think a lot of people resist this concept. Accept the fact that evil and crazy are part of this world. And the last thing I'll say about packing your brain is this. Embrace the concept that you, the person listening to this, may need to be your own first responder. And I'll close with, have fun and enjoy your life. You can absolutely do that while you're paying attention and maybe making a few small changes that will just increase your reaction time. And maybe you won't even need to react because maybe you will recognize something before it happens and you'll have the ability to either leave the environment or short circuit it before it escalates. And that's my thoughts on situational awareness. And it can be taught to your kids as well. Last question for today. And sorry, I know that this podcast is probably going to be shorter than they normally are, but you know what? That's the way it's going to be for today. All right, I'm working my way back into this. Question is, of course, we're going to end on my favorite topic. You know it's going to be something about hunting. The question comes from Wes Allen. If you were going to design a course for new-ish hunters to help them be more successful, what would the curriculum look like? Love this question. So there's obviously bow hunting, and then there's gun hunting. I'm sure there's other types of hunting, but I'm going to focus on those two. First and foremost, if somebody wanted to get into hunting or a newish hunter, I would make sure that they had all of the gear specific to the weaponry that they're going to need. When it comes to having a gun, you're going to need to find a suitable range, and you're going to need to find a range that allows you to shoot at a suitable distance, something that you might encounter in an actual hunting environment. It's actually, in my opinion at least, a little bit easier with a bow because you just need a little bit more space. I literally shoot my backyard. I can go all the way out to 35 yards. And as far as focusing on the fundamentals and the mechanics, I can do it every single day as many times as I want to, weather permitting. And even when it gets really bad weather, I've gone into the garage and had a target ridiculously close and just simply focused on my shot mechanics. So either way, if it was somebody who was new or is just starting off or had just started off, I'd make sure that they had the gear they needed and they'd have a facility where they could actually practice. And then for both gun or for bow, if I was going to design a course, the focus would 100% be on the fundamentals of shooting, because it's pointless to go into the field without a solid grasp of the fundamentals and the mechanics that go with it. So that starts with, in my opinion, the shooting platform. And by that, I mean your body, right? Your combat chassis, the thing that's carrying you around out there on the battlefield, even though it's not a battlefield, people. You're just going hunting. There's nothing shooting back. Hopefully. I haven't seen a whitetail yet that has a gun mounted on its head or its body. If you see that, immediately take a picture of it and send me the location. I'm coming in hot, okay? But what do I mean by the body? I mean, physical conditioning would be a huge aspect or a huge portion of what I would focus on when it comes to preparation for hunting. Inside of that, specifically what I mean is there would be a lot of odd object and heavy object lifting, carrying, moving. And the reason I say that is I've yet to find a barbell or a dumbbell anywhere outside of a gym, ever. Think about nature. It's so uncommon to find something that is incredibly linear and also equally loaded on both sides. And if you're constantly training with things that are linear and equally loaded on both sides, you can develop a great capacity, but there will be a decrease in your ability when you get your hands on an odd object if you've never touched them before. So there would be some work around that. There would be some work with a heavy laden rucksack on your back, because if you're going to be hunting, specifically in the western states where there is, well, I guess there's tree stand hunting here if you want to, but you got varying terrain. You need to be able to operate in that terrain, and you need to be able to operate in that terrain carrying the weight you'd likely be carrying when you're hunting. And then there'd be a cardio component. And the way I train, those things don't necessarily have to happen separately. I believe in high heart rate training and picking up heavy things. I can't think of any situation in my life of true importance or something that mattered that occurred with an incredibly low heart rate. It was actually probably closer to maximal. So there's the focus on the body, and then we're going to go right back into the fundamentals of shooting. The shooting mechanics, the various body positions, how to align your sights, everything that Dudley has taught me, from stance to stacking your joints in your bones to, again, this is with a bow, how you draw, where you anchor, how you acquire your sight. Weapon shooting is not that much different. You need to have a shooting platform. You need to have a stance. You need to have a routine that you go through. You need to find your cheek well. You need to acquire your sight the same way every single time. So I would focus on those things, and then it's all diving into the shot execution. Long-range marksmanship, and you can define long range in whatever terms you want. I don't care. If you want to be really successful, you're going to embrace the theory of a surprise release. That, in my opinion, is the same way to really refine your archery as well, especially at distance. I think there's some confusion about the term surprise release. Surprise release doesn't mean that it jolts you. It means that you're not anticipating. It's the slow, consistent application of pressure. So I use a back tension release for archery. And once I get my sight settled, I slowly, I think in my head, just pull, 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 pull. I know that the bow is going to fire. I don't know the exact instant that it's going to fire, but I'm not surprised when it does. Same principle with rifles. Your finger's on the trigger and you're slowly applying pressure. Press, 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 boom, and it goes off. You know what's going to happen. You're not jolting like, oh wow, that surprised me. That's not what it is, okay? So don't be confused when you hear that term. And then the last thing I would cover in the fundamentals of shooting would be the various angles and the impact that it has on angles. Shooting downhill, the decreased effect of gravity. When you start looking at long-range rifle shooting, you probably should look at humidity. You need to look at temperature, but that's a little bit farther down. And that really, those issues don't really rear their head until you start, I would say, creeping out near, well, unless it's an extreme angle, I'd say 600 yards and out. So it's the physical component of training your body. It's the physical component of working through the mechanics. And that's a good foundation, but then you need to get outside, right? There would be, in a course, if I were to create it, there would be a phase, we'll just call it that, of stalking, concealment, and camo. And that would basically be time out in the woods. And I haven't put too much thought into what it would look like because I don't think I'm ever going to do this, but essentially, kind of like when I went through sniper school, you would practice stalking. And that's a really good, actually, it's a really essential skill to have if you're going to be working from the ground and trying to make moves on animals that can hear better than you in the wild, that can see better than you in the wild, and can damn sure smell better than you, and they want to stay alive. So if you want to be successful and get into bow range or even rifle range sometimes, you're going to need to know how to move in the field. So what's the best way to practice that? Yes, you guessed it, you're going to move in the field. With an asterisk, with all your gear. Moving in the field with just a slick pair of camis on is great. That's not what you're going to be doing for real. So put everything on. The boots you're going to wear, the ruck you're going to wear, take your weapon, whatever it may be. If it's your bow, hold it in your hand or put it on your backpack. If it's your rifle, sling it or put it on your backpack, whatever it is you want to do. Take your binos, take your spotting scope, take everything you would go into the field with. Oh, and by the way, the backpack needs to be loaded with the weight it would likely be in the field as well to replicate the hunting environment. And then you go and you practice. In addition to that, since you're out in the field anyway, if I was king for a day and was making a course, basic navigation would certainly be a portion of that. I would start with map and compass. And yes, I know we live in a technological world where you're going to have a GPS signal at all times, and that's great. But I hate my life relying on batteries. And of all the navigation I've done, even throughout my military career, the vast majority of it was terrain navigation, which started with an understanding of map and compass and how to read a topographical map. Once you can read a topographical map and you can orient yourself and figure out what looks like what, it's so easy to get to go where you want to go. And you don't have to look at the map that often. You look at the map, you literally put a dot where you want to go, you figure out your course, and you fire away. So I'd start map and compass, then I would go terrain navigation, and then, of course, since we do live in a technological world, GPS would be a facet of that as well. But if your GPS failed, no big deal, because you know how to terrain navigate and you know how to use a map and compass. With that, probably a good idea when reading, knowing how to read a map, because you need to understand property boundaries, private, public. You have to know that stuff. I'm pretty sure, I haven't had any encounters with a fish and game warden, but I'm pretty sure I didn't know is not going to be an answer that they're going to accept. They're going to look at that as exactly what it is. That's an excuse. And then in my course, if you were to come to the Andy Stumpf hunting course, what you would find is then once you have the foundation, the mechanics, we've done some practice in the field stalking and some practice with navigation, you are going to start combining all of that. And it's going to terminate in some really high heart rate shooting scenarios, because there is a huge difference between drawing back or lining up your sights on a target that has either foam or paper and a target that has 4 legs and a heartbeat. You're going to experience a physiological response when you aim at an animal for the first time. And I think that happens to everybody. I know it happens to me every single time. And it's not a matter of whether or not it's going to happen. It's a matter of whether or not you can learn to manage it. The best way to learn to manage and to be able to function in that environment is to put yourself in that environment as many times as possible. And in a training environment, you can replicate a lot of it, I believe, with an accelerated heart rate. And then the last thing you're going to get at the course, I think, would be a discussion on expectation management. You can do all the right things. In my limited experience hunting, you can do all of the right things and you can still fail. And that's just part of the deal, because just like in combat, your enemy has a vote, and just like in the field when you're hunting, the animal has a vote too. You could do everything right and still just be screwed by bad luck. What I'll say with that, and what I would cover in the course, is that you can learn from every single day in the field. And who cares? Because no one's shooting at you. So learn the lessons that are presented to you and just try to do better the next time. And I would say get out as often as possible and start making mistakes. You can blow a stock, and you're going to. You can miss a shot, and you're going to. And for me, that's the best motivation ever, the desire not to repeat what that feels like. And I think it's essential that you feel it at some point. If you're only successful and you never experience failure, I don't think you are anywhere near the limit of your capability. The last thing I would say is have fun. Try to enjoy the process and worry a little bit less about the end result. And this is something that I definitely struggle with, but I remind myself often, like, dude, I'm out in an amazing location doing something that I love. Let's worry a little bit less as to whether or not I'm successful today, and just try to get in touch with why I'm out here and maybe learn a little bit of something about myself and refine my skills a little bit. So that would be my course. If anybody wants to go to that course, go ahead and hit me up via email. I don't know if I'll ever do that course, but now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of sounds fun. I would need Dudley for this because I can't teach archery. So what I should say is hit up Dudley via email and ask him if he'd be interested. And that's it. That's episode 39. 40 will be coming at you next week. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for I think it was a 1 or 2 week gap in between this episode and the last one. Like I said, shit happens. The podcast is going to continue, no doubt about it. For those of you that have found the podcast and you enjoy it, do me a favor. Tell somebody else about it. I think that's the biggest thing you guys could do to help me out, other than going on and writing a review on iTunes, which a ton of people have done. Give it a rating, write a review, good, bad, or ugly. Tell me however it is that you feel about the podcast. If it's something that I can do to make it better, I definitely will. I'm going to release a new shirt next week. It will definitely be specifically for people who, the shirt's not even going to make sense to people who don't listen to the podcast, which is totally fine with me because I made it for those of you who do listen.